Hello, and welcome to the Tex Mix, brought to you by Texas Signal. My name is Jessica Montoya Coggins, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Arif Panju. He's a managing attorney with the Institute of Justice. He oversees the Texas office, and we're going to talk about something called civil forfeiture today. So welcome, Arif.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. We're thrilled to be on the podcast today.
Well, thank you so much. So could you start off and just let us know, what is the Institute of Justice and what do y'all do?
Well, the Institute for Justice is a 30-plus-year-old organization now. We're a national nonprofit public interest law firm, and our mission is to end widespread abuses of government power and to secure individual rights so that individuals and persons can pursue their dreams here in the United States. And we do this in multiple areas of the law, but all involving the Constitution and the intersection of government power and individual liberty. We cover property rights, due process property rights that may involve fines and fees, or property rights that may involve condemning someone's house or taking people's stuff, like with civil forfeiture, along with other individual liberties like economic liberty, educational choice, free speech. We do a lot of work in trying to rein in the abuses of qualified immunity. If there's a right, there should be a remedy, and the Fourth Amendment. And we do all of this with one vision in mind, and that's to vindicate the pillars of a free society. And we're guaranteed that by 51 constitutions, the US Constitution and all 50 state constitutions. And we litigate across all of these documents and charters of liberty, all the states, and against the feds if we have to.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine Texas keeps y'all pretty busy.
Texas does have, it's like many other states, its upsides and its downsides. That is correct. And we've secured a lot of several landmark cases here in Texas, and we're hoping to do so again in the area of civil forfeiture.
So you co-wrote an op-ed for Texas Signal last year, and it was about a client. His name is Emil Woods. Could you tell us about him and where things stand with his case currently?
Yeah. Emil Woods is a gentleman that lives in Mississippi, along with his wife, Jordan Davis, and he drives trucks. And a couple of years ago, he had a great idea to turn his life from truck driver to truck owner and becoming an owner-operator. And his experience really reflects the state of affairs with civil forfeiture in Texas and really around the country. Civil forfeiture is one of the most abusive and dangerous assaults on property rights and due process today. It's the case in Texas and also across the country, unfortunately. And police and prosecutors under civil forfeiture laws, just to tee that up for the audience, civil forfeiture laws allow the government to seize people's stuff like cash, cars, and houses, accuse the stuff of doing something illegal, and then sue the stuff in civil court so they can forfeit and keep it. There is no requirement that criminal charges be brought. Those are optional. And so one of the big problems with civil forfeiture is that police and prosecutors can seize property without arresting anyone. And then they can forfeit and keep property without convicting anyone. And as everyone listening to this is well aware, in this country, people are innocent until proven guilty. But Texas's forfeiture laws flip that foundational principle on its head. And in Texas, your property is presumed guilty. And it's your job to go to civil court if it's been taken from you by the law enforcement officers and prove your property innocent. And if I asked all of your audience to prove to me that they did not listen to a certain podcast in a given day, it'd be very hard to prove a negative. They can probably write down everything they did do that day, everything they did listen to, but it still doesn't prove that they did not do something. And that's the crux of the state of affairs with Texas forfeiture law. You have to prove your property innocent. And at the heart of this thing, at the heart of the civil forfeiture law in Texas, is a profit incentive. Police and prosecutors have a financial incentive to seize and forfeit stuff because it goes directly into their budgets. Up to 100% of what they take can go directly back into their budgets. And Harris County has made civil forfeiture into a commercial enterprise, raking in over $20 million in the last couple of years. And millions of those dollars go directly to salary and overtime. And that is a problem because the people that are incentivized to seize and forfeit your stuff should not be also financially incentivized to do so. From a due process standpoint, that's a problem. Emil Woods and Jordan Davis were just trying to realize their American dream, and they had saved over $40,000. They put it in their vehicle, and they were ready to drive. Emil was ready to drive to Houston to go buy a secondhand trailer and a secondhand tractor to pull the trailer if the price was right. So he had 2 bundles of money. He sealed them up, put them in his trunk, and drove off from Mississippi to Houston. And that's how.
There's nothing illegal with that at all. That is something that you and I could do, anybody could do.
Cash is not a crime. I mean, it just isn't. And Emil and Jordan saved their money. They're allowed to have cash. Emil drives trucks. Emil has some horses that he takes care of as well down in Mississippi. And Jordan works at a restaurant. And they work long hours to cobble up money. And a lot of people, that are of modest means have to save up and pursue their dreams in any way that they know how. And that's what they did. And when Emil started driving, he knew that, he had to keep the money safe. He put it in his trunk, he sealed it, packed it away. But the last thing he thought that would happen would be that the law enforcement officers along I-10 would pull him over and take his life savings away from him and then send him on his way. But that's exactly what happened.
And I recall in the op-ed, you mentioned these things that the Harris County, the sheriff's office was implying about Emil. He looked, quote unquote, he was shifting his eyes. I think he was something about he was licking his lips or something very ridiculous in these notes about this, quote unquote, guilty conduct.
And that's why they have to focus on things like that, because there's absolutely no evidence that Emil did anything wrong. There were no drugs in the car. There's no evidence that he was trafficking anything. There's no paraphernalia. He was just driving to purchase a truck. The officer even called back to Mississippi to talk to Jordan Davis because Emil rightfully said that some of the money was Jordan's, his wife's. And the story was confirmed. Police officer just continued on with seizing the money. And that's really the problem with the policing for profit incentive at the heart of this thing. When there's a financial incentive, then you have law enforcement pursuing profit over policing. And that's a problem. The incentives are out of whack. So the affidavit, which you're referring to, is a document that is attached to a petition. So after the property is seized by law enforcement, it's handed over to the district attorney's office down in Harris County for Houston. And they have to file a case in civil court under the civil forfeiture law and accuse the cash of doing something wrong. The affidavit is attached to this thing and is supposed to be the evidence that they have probable cause. And there's no probable cause. Licking your lips and blinking there's nothing wrong with that. Just like having cash is perfectly legal. And if you look at one thing we notice about the affidavits is that we noticed that there was a form at the bottom of the affidavits, and that after digging into what Harris County was doing in a lot of different cases, we saw a pattern emerging. For example, one of the things that Harris County does quite a bit of is almost, it seems that they're using forfeiture petitions and affidavits as if they were on an assembly line. They recycle stock language from one affidavit to the next, sometimes verbatim, and not just any language in the affidavit, key allegations. One of the things that we found in Emil's affidavit, the affidavit of the officer that's accusing Emil of doing something wrong, is that there was an after the fact dog alert. So after they seize the stuff, then they try to find the probable cause. So they take the money back to the station and a dog barks. But we pulled over 100 affidavits, I remember in the first review, and that exact sentence appeared in dozens and dozens of affidavits at the exact same place of the form. in some of these affidavits, the law enforcement officer that signed off on them didn't even change the font to make it all match up when they were copying and pasting some other stuff in the middle. So key allegations appear over and over and over, word for word. The other thing which is unusual is that the same notarized signature appears on affidavit after affidavit. The officer that signs and swears under oath and signs the affidavit is not present at the scene. This is just someone back at the office that is running this assembly line of affidavits for forfeiture petitions. And so what you're effectively doing is stripping the documents of sworn testimony from anyone with actual firsthand knowledge. So Emil's affidavit has some things like you mentioned, that there was some blinking, but Emil has nothing to hide. He let the officer search the car because he thought that was the right thing to do at the time, and the officer found nothing. The officer called Jordan, his wife, who confirmed that he was on his way to buy exactly what he was going to buy. Emil lives out in the bayou down in Mississippi, so they're into hunting and riding horses. He had his legal firearm. The officer just left it there, didn't want to seize or forfeit that, but did want to take the cash. And that is really at the heart of civil forfeiture in Texas, and civil forfeiture abuses, rather, in Texas and everywhere else. It's the profit incentive. And that's why law enforcement fights tooth and nail to keep these laws in the books so that they can profit from them. If there is no profit incentive, I think one of the big problems with civil forfeiture would go away. But there's plenty others. You need to have an arrest before you convict someone. And you need to convict someone before there's a adjudication that something wrong actually happened. But neither of those things have to happen in civil forfeiture. You just kind of accuse property of a crime and attach a shoddy affidavit and try to keep it. And that's the problem with civil forfeiture, because it really wrecks people's lives, like Emil and Jordan, who are simply trying to pick themselves up by the bootstraps, earn an honest living, cobble up life savings together, and grow their business from truck driver to truck owner. And that came to a halt on the side of I-10 on the way to Houston to buy the tractor trailer he had been dreaming about. And this is a lesson not just for Emil and Jordan, but for everyone else. People across the United States on a daily basis have their property taken, whether it's cash, cars, whether they lend a car to someone, whether they're just driving to see relatives with money in the car. People get their stuff taken from law enforcement day in and day out without ever being arrested or convicted. And in Texas, this is a $50+ million a year racket. And Houston profits more than any other county, Harris County, in Texas.
Do we have any idea how many cases this amounts to, or how many people this has impacted?
The aggregate amount of cases is hard because there is the Harris County forfeiture unit, along with any forfeiture in any other county, are not required to report a lot of information. They don't have to identify how many cases were the result of seizures where there was no arrest and no conviction. They don't have to report anything about the actual forfeitures themselves. They only report what they spent the money on. There's categories of stuff. So they could say, well, this much went to this category, this much went to that category. But the Constitution guarantees liberty. And so the key thing that most people would like to know is, what are you doing with the power that the people have given you? And a lot of lawmakers have asked about this as well. Before we ever sued Harris County, and before we ever met Emil Woods and Jordan Davis, lawmakers in both parties at the Texas legislature, both in the House of Representatives and in Texas Senate, have filed legislation to rein in forfeiture abuse. They attempted to go after the burden of proof by putting it on the government. They were requiring criminal convictions, like Representative Dutton down in Houston. They attempted to get more reporting. They attempted to prevent the adoption with federal agencies of forfeitures, because a lot of law enforcement, especially in other states where you can't keep the money in your own budgets, will seek out federal officials, hand over the forfeiture to them as if they're handing the baton. The feds will do the forfeiture and then kick back a portion of the proceeds, despite the state law in that state saying you can't have forfeiture proceeds directly incentivizing you. So it's the money that's driving a lot of this. And despite lawmakers in both parties pointing to the issue, the only opposition uniformly every session in both chambers, in those committees when those hearings take place, are law enforcement lobbyists. And for the legislature to come session after session after session and stifle these bills from getting a floor vote because law enforcement doesn't want a floor vote, and we don't get to see where the lawmakers are on this. We do know, though, that both political parties have on their party plank reining in forfeiture abuse, requiring conviction before you take people's stuff. And so criminal courts are there for a reason. You get a right to counsel, you have protections, and if there's a conviction, criminal forfeiture is available. Law enforcement doesn't want to go that route. They take the stuff, they don't have to arrest or convict, and run to civil court, where the rules are stacked against the property owner, where you don't get an attorney, and where most forfeitures are relatively small. So it's not really worthwhile to spend cash to get an attorney just to get the same amount of money back. And so what we have here is a situation where there's all sorts of abuses. There's abuses at the very macro level with the financial incentive. There's abuses because of the structure of the law. You don't have to arrest or convict anyone. Criminal charges are optional. You can still take people's stuff and keep it. And in terms of Harris County, there is a pattern and practice of forfeiture abuse that is shocking. The use of copy and paste language of material allegations and affidavits, having officers sign off on these things, stripping them away of anyone with firsthand knowledge because the officer was never even there, and taking people's property like Emil and Jordan, who should just be left alone. They committed no crime. Cash is not a crime. And because of these abuses, because they've been so widespread in Harris County, the pattern and practice of using these copy and paste affidavits, these after the fact dog alerts, identifying those dog alerts using, again, a copy and paste text affidavit after affidavit, sometimes without even changing the font because you're just copying and pasting it. These are pattern and practices that led to IJ filing a civil rights class action lawsuit against Harris County, in addition to entering the case to get Emil and Jordan's money back. I mean, Emil and Jordan ultimately are reflective of what you want to have in a civil rights plaintiff. They, of course, have a dream. They've had their life savings taken, but the reason they're doing this case is to enforce the Texas Constitution, to ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone again. Anyone, not just them, but anyone else. And a class action, as we've alleged, will provide the remedies to start to begin that process of having that kind of remedy in place to protect everyone. And that's why the Institute for Justice has been litigating this issue in Texas, has been pushing for reform in the legislature as well. But if the legislature fails to act, the courts must act. They are a co-equal branch of government tasked with enforcing the Texas Constitution and the US Constitution.
I think, that what really struck me reading about Emil's case is, as you said, having cash is not a crime. And this is exactly the type of sort of quote unquote free enterprise that we're supposed to celebrate in this country. You have someone who saved up enough of their savings to go purchase a truck coming over from Mississippi, and this is what happens to them. What if you had to sort of let people know how civil forfeiture really just something that they might not realize can just happen to anyone. It does seem like Emil's case is the perfect test for this. As you said, there was no crime, nothing, but still they had those assets seized.
Yeah, the more we've done these cases over the years, the more we've talked about them in the court of public opinion to educate people about their constitutional rights and how this power is being abused by the government. The more people that are learning about civil forfeiture abuse come to realize that this really could happen to anyone. Emil and Jordan are hardworking parents that are just trying to earn an honest living, and they wanted to build a business. Their money got taken on the side of the road. We had a client recently that drove from Texas through Nevada to go to California to see his children. He had thousands of dollars in the car. He's a military vet, an ex-Marine. He got pulled over. That particular case, we were lucky to get dash cam and body cam footage And you can see it in real time how this occurs, how the taking of someone's property without any inkling of a reason to arrest this person, or let alone convict them, how that actually takes place. And that happened to a dad going to see his kids. We have had clients who operate restaurants and a grocery store, two separate cases, one in Michigan, the grocery store, and I think Iowa, the restaurant, where the IRS emptied an account out because they accused it of structuring, depositing right under $10,000, which they alleged was to avoid reporting 10 grand or more. It's legal to deposit 10 grand or more or under 10 grand. And the Michigan grocery store had an insurance policy. The restaurant owner was just depositing money. I mean, she was in her final years of running the restaurant and she was depositing money. There's no reason to hide anything. They cook food and sell food, respectively. But the IRS would just empty those accounts, literally empty them. And then you had to file a petition, try to get your money back. So the federal government is in on this. The Department of Justice is in on this. We just filed a case on behalf of a company called Imperial, where the federal government has teamed up with some local governments to target, follow, and seize cash in armored car vehicles that support the legal cannabis industry in states that have made it legal. I mean, this is targeted at people that they know have cash for no reason other than to take their cash. And the examples go on and on and on. You could sell a car to someone on payments. They haven't paid. Maybe they got pulled over for something. You have an interest in making sure that the car is paid off, so you still own part of it. You could lose that. That was one of our clients. And so whether you own a business, whether you're trying to start a business, whether you're just going to go see family and drive with cash, whether you've grown your business, but you're legally transporting cash, which is legal, and cash, which is also legal. All of these, whether you have a lot of money and you're a big business or you don't have a lot, everyone is in the crosshairs when it comes to civil asset forfeiture. And at the heart of all of this is the policing for profit incentive. And our goal is to get the Texas Supreme Court and ultimately the US Supreme Court to weigh in and hold that these types of laws are unconstitutional. We're entitled to due process. The playing field has to be fair. If property is accused of crime, you have to convict the person of a crime. And people shouldn't be forced to prove their own innocence. And at the heart of all this, law enforcement should not have their policing priorities skewed by having a financial incentive to seize and forfeit property because they get to keep it in their own budgets to fund salaries and overtime pay. These are simple public policy questions that most people at a gut level understand where the right answer is. That's why both parties have on their party planks to reform and rein in civil forfeiture abuse. And that's why at state capitals, you see lawmakers on both parties trying to rein it in. Law enforcement lobbies, though, heavily to stop that. And it's because of exactly what's happening in Harris County in Houston, Texas. There's a lot of money at stake, and this is money that's taken from people in the civil courts, not the criminal courts, involving folks who have not been arrested or convicted, or innocent people that are being forced to prove their innocence. And that needs to come to an end. And the Institute for Justice will not rest till that conclusion takes place. We believe that the Constitution is there for a reason. It is a bulwark of liberty, and the government needs to comply with the strict requirements to protect rights and to not abuse government power. Unfortunately, with civil forfeiture in Texas, the abuse of government power is extreme, and the violation of individual rights is staggering. And that's why we have sued Harris County on behalf of Ameal and Jordan, not just to get their money back, but to protect everyone's rights.
Well, it also seems that even, thinking of law enforcement, and that has certainly been a large topic these last couple of years, but I do not feel safer knowing that, Emil had these assets seized and was not able to get a truck. So it does actually seem that for folks that want to have, police departments that actually protect citizens, this seems like something that would make a lot of sense and also would actually help Harris County if they were to adopt practices that did not, did not have their overtime being funded by something like this, that it would actually help the community all around.
That's exactly right. Those that are entrusted with government power are entrusted with that power because the government power is designed to protect individual rights. That's what the government exists, to secure rights, and that's what they should be doing. Here you see the opposite, where people's rights are being trampled so that the government power can be fueled with more money using seizures and forfeitures in civil court. And unfortunately, with Harris County, we see what the policing for profit incentive does. It creates a perverse financial incentive. And you're right, the right policy move to do would be to reject using these patterns and practices that are going on in Harris County, and to not take people's stuff using the civil courts, use the criminal courts if you actually believe that the property is involved in a crime. But Harris County has been at the forefront in the Texas legislature in trying to kill every single forfeiture reform bill there is. They oppose all of it, both in committee hearings and behind the scenes. And the only ones opposing forfeiture reform behind the scenes and in committee hearings are law enforcement lobbyists, including actual law enforcement agencies who engage in these practices. And it's easy to see why. They generate a lot of revenue that way. And as I mentioned, Harris County has turned civil forfeiture into a commercial enterprise. From 2018 to 2020, they banked $23.5 million. And millions of that went directly to salaries and overtime. And as we've looked at the case filings, we understand how that forfeiture machine works. And it's an assembly line using shoddy affidavits that recycle stock language, that copy and paste material allegations, and that strip those documents of sworn testimony from someone that actually has firsthand knowledge. The person signing them wasn't even there. And that cut and paste strategy to forfeiture flouts the notion of probable cause. And Emil Woods lost his cash based on little more than speculation, just because it was cash and over 40 grand worth of cash, speculation that maybe it's somehow tied to drugs. What's missing from the affidavit and what's missing from all of these probable cause affidavits are the actual elements of a crime that would justify forfeiture in the first instance. And that's because that's not what's going on here. It's an assembly line. It is a machine. And unfortunately, we've seen this at play in cities like Philadelphia, which had a forfeiture machine. They even had an entire courtroom with no judges, courtroom 478, where only prosecutors were there. And if you dare show up to get your property back, you had a new court date. Sometimes 8, 9 times you had to come back. And if you didn't, you lost your stuff. That class action ended. Philadelphia gave up, and millions of dollars were returned to people who lost them. Harris County is on a bigger scale. I mean, they've been, engaging in forfeitures in a grand scale for years and years and years. And as we lay out the Institute for Justice in our national report, Policing for Profit, where we grade all the states based on all these different criteria, who has the burden? What about innocent owners? What about the profit incentive? What about transparency? It's no surprise that Texas has a D+ on its forfeiture law. And that's because it is unconstitutional. Not only that, it is in a state with very little transparency on the forfeiture side of the process. They only like to talk about and disclose what they spend the money on and post on Twitter when they find people's stuff, and then try to flout it as something to be proud of. I think Dallas PD recently tweeted out a
At the
picture
airport,
of money
yes,
giving props to their dog. And the question was, well, what about the rest of the story? What was the arrest about? What was
that prompted a lot. That was, I believe, Love Field, and
there was no
I
arrest.
think it was the airline department that they had the K9 unit. They're like, oh, the dog found, this several $1,000s, and again, people pointed out like, well, what's not a crime? What happened here? I do actually, a friend of mine is on the Dallas Police Oversight Board, so I think they were meeting about that.
That tweet went sideways if you look at the comments, and it went viral for the straightforward reason that you're flouting taking cash and you're making no mention of whatever criminal activity you claim took place and that you're willing to prove. And that's because the cash is the game. And for folks who fly domestically or internationally, IJ's has lawsuits on both fronts. International travelers, many people might not know this, have to actually declare when they leave the country with more than 10 grand, which is a hard thing to do. That you don't go through customs on the way out, you do it on the way in, and you declare it on the way in also. And our client, Antonia Nuwahari, a nurse, was traveling back to Africa, where she does every year to set up a clinic. She's a nurse that does a lot of charitable work back home. And they somehow knew that she had money in her luggage. They pulled her off the plane. She missed her flight. They ripped her luggage open, took her cash. She did nothing wrong. The other luggage was full of medical supplies. They just sliced it all up. We sued them. They immediately try to return the money and try to kill the case so that a judge can't rule on whether what happened was constitutional or not. And that's what law enforcement does. They know that fighting against claims that what they're doing is unconstitutional is a loser for them. So they give up on these cases. And they keep filing them to take people's stuff. But when people fight back, you see odd things happening. Same thing with domestic travel. We have a case litigated by a colleague of mine where the TSA, we've alleged, tips off the Department of Homeland Security to the airport, pointing towards cash. And, the TSA has an obligation. So under statute, they have the ability to scan luggage, but they can't seize things, and they can't surely, stop people from moving about the country because they have cash. But that's what's happening. They're seizing people and their property, their cash, and trying to take it in airports around the country. Just like you saw in Dallas, pulling cash off of someone just because it's cash, without arrest, without conviction. It's another case that we have going on in Pittsburgh, and also involving a lot of what TSA and DHS are doing. And so the Institute for Justice has been working on civil forfeiture for years. And one of the most important things for folks to learn from this podcast is that it could happen to them, because it is happening to literally anyone. There's people that are wealthy, people that are poor. Of course, it impacts people that are of lesser means, like Emil and Jordan, because it destroys their ability to climb the economic ladder, and this is their life savings. But it also hurts companies that are trying to grow as well. The other thing which I think is important for listeners to take note of is that there are state constitutions and the US Constitution, and all 51 of those documents protects against forfeiture abuse. And so no matter what state you're in, no matter who takes the money or the car, in terms of state agency, local agency, or federal agency, the racket is the same, which means that you have an opportunity, unlike the other branches of government, by going to a court and finding the right lawyer, you have the ability to file a petition and put an end to civil forfeiture. And so if you have an outrageous abuse where cash or property has been taken, you can go to ij.org and let us know about it. And we're active all over the country, because our goal is not against law enforcement. Our goal is for liberty and to end these outrageous and widespread abuses of government power. We're all better off when they're not happening. And that's what IJ will focus on.
Do we have a timetable for Emil's case right now, and where that is?
Yes. So we're in the trial court. Cases often take about a year in the trial court, more or less, in the civil rights world. It depends on how big or small the record is in those cases and how much discovery takes place. And so that's the first phase. You start in the trial court. The second phase is the intermediate appellate court, the Court of Appeals. And then the third level is the Supreme Court, in this case, Supreme Court of Texas. You can go to the US Supreme Court going the state court route if you have a claim that the Supreme Court could hear. And the same three-tiered system of courts exists in the federal courts. And so Emil's case is in stage 1 in the trial court, and we are in front of a judge down in Harris County, and I'm certain we'll be litigating this in front of him for the good part of this year, maybe not. You never know how the ball bounces in constitutional cases, but we are prepared to take this case all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court, if need be. And we have alleged class claims with Emil and Jordan leading the class, but there's plenty of folks that find themselves in the same position, and having a class action asking for relief in the form of an injunction and a declaration, which means declare that this is unconstitutional and enter an injunction preventing it from happening. That's what the class action is asking for in the civil rights context, including in our case. And that'll protect everyone. And that's the goal of the Institute for Justice, is to provide the most widespread relief to protect as many people's rights as possible from the most widespread abuses that we can tackle. Mm-hmm. And civil forfeiture happens to be the biggest assault on property rights in the nation today.
And for anyone listening who, wants to get involved or maybe just let people know about what's happening, what would you recommend doing?
I would recommend that you go to ij.org. In fact, we have a brand newly redesigned site. It's amazing. But one of the advantages to ij.org is that you get to see the real people that are on the front lines fighting back. Institute for Justice has lawyers, strategic researchers, folks in media. We run the gamut. We do a lot of different things at IJ. We do legislative work. We do all sorts of things. But the real heroes are our clients. And if you go to ij.org, you'll see every single case that we do, no matter what the issue, is told through the eyes of our clients. Our clients are front and center, and you really get to see the real human cost of government powers being abused and rights being violated. So if you want to learn more about forfeiture or about the Institute for Justice, please go to ij.org. And you can always contact us if there's something that you think we should know about.
Well, I cannot, my heart goes out to Emil and his family. And I just am so thankful that he has you and the rest of the team at IOJ with him during this. And again, thank you so much for what y'all have been, just sort of letting us know, because as y'all submitted an op-ed to us, and that was for us, for many of us, sort of one of the first times we've kind of heard about the civil forfeiture and how much it is happening in Texas and especially Harris County.
Absolutely. It's an important issue. Thank you for covering it. Thank you for hosting us on this great podcast. And Jessica, thanks for asking great questions. And I hope your listeners enjoyed the talk.
Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We are on Apple. We're on Google. For the moment, we're on Spotify, though that I think will change imminently. And again, you can find us also on Anchor as well as YouTube. And again, my thanks to Arif Panju for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.